During a peaceful walk through the city, a father and his daughter come across an injured and abandoned police dog. The unexpected reunion between the man and the animal reveals a buried past filled with secrets. An attempt by a powerful stranger to buy the dog triggers a reaction that explodes across social media. Now, with the truth threatening to surface, the entire country wonders, how much is the silence of one who served worth? Chapter 1. The Reunion. The afternoon in Manchester had that golden hue typical of late October, when the sun begins to decline, but still holds its comforting warmth over the bustling streets of the Didsbury neighbourhood. Robert Nolan walked slowly along the pavement, holding the small warm hand of Claire, his 6-year-old daughter. It was one of those rare moments when he could turn off his phone, forget about the pending reports, and simply be a father. Claire swung his arm enthusiastically, chattering non-stop about the drawing she had made at school, about the new teacher who was very nice, about the kitten the neighbour had adopted. Robert smiled, absorbing every word as if he were collecting treasures. The life of a police officer had never been easy. Since joining the force at 23, Robert had learned that the job demanded constant sacrifices. Irregular hours, night shifts, cancelled weekends. His marriage to Mary hadn't withstood the pressure. She had tried, for years, to accept the absences, the phone calls interrupting dinners, the postponed promises. But there came a point when the emotional distance became greater than any love. The separation happened 3 years ago, civilly and sadly. Mary had rebuilt her life with a tech entrepreneur, a present, predictable man who came home every day at 6 in the evening. Robert didn't blame her. He knew he was the one who had chosen the profession, who had put duty above all else. And now, sharing custody of Claire, he cherished every minute with his daughter with an almost painful intensity. Claire was a special child, everyone said so, but for Robert, it wasn't just fatherly pride. There was something genuinely unique about her, a keen sensitivity, an ability to notice details that adults ignored. She would stop to watch ants, carrying crumbs, become mesmerized by clouds that looked like animals, talk to plants as if they could answer. Mary said Claire had inherited her maternal grandmother's sensitive side, a woman who painted watercolors and read poetry aloud. Robert didn't know where that gift came from, but he knew Claire saw the world differently. And on that afternoon, as they walked toward Mrs. Peterson's ice cream parlor, it was precisely this sensitivity that would change everything. They were 2 blocks from the ice cream parlor when Claire stopped abruptly. Robert almost stumbled, taken by surprise by the force with which she pulled his hand. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, looking around to identify what had caught her attention. Claire pointed ahead, her small finger extended towards something on the pavement. "There, Daddy. Look there." Robert followed his daughter's gaze and felt something tighten in his chest. Tied to a lamppost, a large dog was lying on the warm concrete. The animal was a German shepherd, or had been, because now it seemed only a shadow of what that majestic breed should be. Its fur was dull, dirty, with obvious patches missing in several places. Its ribs showed beneath the stretched skin. The chain that held it was thick, disproportionate, as if to prevent the escape of a ferocious animal, but this dog could barely lift its head. Claire let go of her father's hand and took a few steps toward the animal. Robert instinctively extended his arm in a protective gesture, but she was already too close. The dog raised its eyes, 2 dark circles of exhaustion and resignation, and stared at the little girl. There was no aggression in that gaze, only a deep, ancient sadness, as if it had already given up on expecting any kindness from the world. On the ground next to the dog, a crumpled piece of cardboard bore a sentence written in black marker, "One down injured police dog." The letters were large, rushed, written by someone who didn't care about the message, only wanting to get rid of a problem. It wasn't a plea for help, it was an advertisement for disposal. Robert felt the air leave his lungs. He approached slowly, his mind trying to process what he was seeing. Claire was already crouching beside the animal, her small hand extended carefully, letting the dog sniff her. The German shepherd moved its muzzle, slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture, and Claire smiled. "He's hungry, Daddy, and thirsty. Look how skinny he is." Robert knelt beside his daughter, his eyes fixed on the animal. There was something familiar about this dog, something that went beyond the breed, the color of its coat. It was the way it held its ears, the way its eyes moved, cautious yet intelligent. And then Robert saw it, a small scar above its left eye, shaped like a comma, a mark he knew as well as he knew his own hands. Shadow. The name escaped his lips like an incredulous whisper. Claire looked at her father, confused, but Robert could hardly breathe. That was Shadow, his partner, his companion on countless operations, on nights of surveillance, on moments of danger where the trust between man and animal had been all that kept them alive. Shadow, who had disappeared 8 months ago during an operation in Trafford Park. Shadow, who had been declared lost after fruitless searches. Shadow, whom Robert had mourned in secret, alone in his flat, feeling guilt gnaw at him like acid. And now he was here, abandoned, forgotten, reduced to £1. Robert extended a trembling hand and touched the dog's head. Shadow lifted his muzzle, his eyes meeting Robert's. There was a moment of recognition. Something ancient, deep, crossed the space between them. Shadow's tail moved. It wasn't an enthusiastic wag as it used to be. It was weak, hesitant, but it was a movement. He remembered. "Daddy, do you know this dog?" Claire asked, her voice full of surprise. Robert couldn't answer immediately. The words were stuck in his throat, mixed with anger, pain, relief, and an overwhelming confusion. How had Shadow ended up here? Who had left him in this state? Why did they say he was injured? And why would someone put such a ridiculous price on him as if he were rubbish? He tried to unfasten the chain from the post, but it was secured with a sturdy padlock. Shadow remained quiet, his eyes fixed on Robert, as if expecting him to do something. As he always had. It was then that a male voice interrupted the moment. "How much for this police dog?" Robert turned sharply. A man stood a few feet away, observing the scene with an almost clinical interest. He was tall, must have been in his 50s, and wore an impeccable grey suit that contrasted with the simple street setting. His hair was grey, well cut, and he had an erect, confident posture. But what caught Robert's attention the most was his gaze, cold, calculating, as if he were evaluating merchandise at an auction. The man repeated the question, now with a faint smile on his lips. "I'm asking how much this dog costs. I saw the sign. £1, right? Will you take 2? 3? Robert felt anger rise like lava. He stood up slowly, placing himself between Claire and the stranger. His voice came out firm, sharp, loaded with a contempt he didn't try to hide. "Heroes aren't for sale, but the corrupt have a price." The man arched an eyebrow, his smile widening. "Corrupt? What an interesting accusation, officer. And how do you know I'm corrupt?" Robert didn't answer. He didn't need to. There was something about that man that screamed misused power, influence wielded in the shadows, decisions made in closed rooms where ethics was just a pretty word. He knew the type. He dealt with them constantly. Businessmen who bought favors, politicians who manipulated systems, people who thought money solved everything and that people and animals were just disposable pieces. The man took a wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a few notes. "I'm willing to pay well for this dog. Let's say £500. That's generous, considering its condition." Robert took a step forward, his jaw clenched. "He's not for sale to anyone." "Everything has a price, officer," the man said, slowly putting his wallet away. "Even loyalty, even justice. You'll find that out sooner or later." And without waiting for a reply, the man turned and walked toward a black car parked on the other side of the street. It was an expensive, discreet model with tinted windows. He got in without rushing, like someone with all the time in the world, and the car drove off in silence. Claire tugged on her father's shirt sleeve. "Daddy, who was that man?" Robert didn't know how to answer, but as he watched the car disappear around the corner, he felt a chill run up his spine. That wasn't a casual conversation, it was a warning, or perhaps a veiled threat. But of what? Why? He looked at Shadow again. The dog was watching him with those tired eyes, and Robert knew he couldn't just leave him there. Not after everything, not after discovering he was alive. "Wait here with him, Claire. I'm going to call someone." Robert stepped away and dialed a colleague from the police veterinary division, Dr. Henry, a vet who worked with the K9 unit dogs. Henry answered on the third ring. "Rob, everything all right?" "Henry, I need you now. It's urgent. I'm on King Street, near Mrs. Peterson's ice cream parlor. I found a dog, a German Shepherd." There was a pause. "Rob, it's Shadow, Henry." "I found Shadow." The silence that followed was long, tense. When Henry finally spoke, his voice was low, almost incredulous. "Shadow? But Shadow is... Rob, Shadow was declared lost months ago." "I know, but he's here. And he's in bad shape. Really bad. I need you to come and get him. Now." "Rob, Are you sure?" "Positive." Another pause. "All right. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Robert hung up and returned to Claire and Shadow. The girl was sitting on the ground, talking softly to the dog, telling him about school, about the drawings she made, about the neighbor's cat. Shadow kept his eyes fixed on her, and for the first time since Robert had found him, he seemed slightly more relaxed. Robert took the water bottle he carried in his backpack and poured a little into the palm of his hand, offering it to Shadow. The dog drank slowly, with difficulty, as if even that simple act was painful. Then Robert shared the cereal bar he had saved, crushing it into small pieces to make it easier. Shadow ate slowly, each piece seeming to require immense effort. While waiting for Henry, Robert tried to organize his thoughts. Shadow had disappeared. During a routine operation, or at least that's what the official report said, the K9 unit had been called to sweep a warehouse in Trafford Park, part of an investigation into irregularities at an import company. Shadow was with another officer that day because Robert was on medical leave recovering from a knee injury. When the team returned, Shadow was no longer with them. The report stated that he had slipped his lead during the sweep and escaped through an open door at the back of the warehouse. The search lasted 3 days. Sniffer dogs were used. Drones flew over the area. But Shadow was never found. Robert had questioned everything. He had talked to the officers involved, reviewed the protocols, demanded explanations. But they all said the same thing. It was an accident. Shadow got spooked by something and ran. It happens. Dogs have their moments of panic too. But Robert knew Shadow. He didn't run. He didn't get scared easily. He was a trained, disciplined, brave dog. Something didn't make sense. And now, finding him like this, abandoned, with a sign advertising him for £1, only confirmed that there was something very wrong with the whole story. Dr. Henry arrived in a white van from the veterinary division. He was a short, stocky man with round glasses and thinning hair. He practically ran out of the van, carrying a first aid kit and a look of astonishment on his face. "My God, Rob, it really is him." Henry knelt beside Shadow and began a preliminary examination. His hands moved quickly and precisely, feeling ribs, checking gums, listening to the heartbeat with a stethoscope. As he worked, his face grew darker and darker. He's severely malnourished, dehydrated, shows signs of anemia. And look at this, Henry pointed to Shadow's neck, where the skin was irritated and had open sores. This is from a collar that was too tight, worn for a long time. And there's more. Look at his paws. Robert looked. The pads of Shadow's paws were cracked, bleeding in some spots. He walked a long way, or was dragged. Either way, these wounds are recent, a few days at most. "Can you take him now?" Robert asked, his voice tense. "Yes, I'm going straight to the veterinary clinic that serves the force. I need to run full tests, X-rays, blood work, analysis of the identification chip." "Shadow still has a chip, right?" "He did. When he disappeared, he did." Henry nodded. "I'll check if it's still working. And Rob, I need you to know something. If Shadow was found in this condition, abandoned, an internal procedure will have to be opened. This could raise a lot of questions, complicated questions. I know. Are you sure you want to go through with this? You know how it is. Messing with the past, with filed reports, with decisions already made. There will be people who won't like it." Robert looked at Shadow, then at Claire, who was watching everything, with wide eyes. "I don't have a choice." Henry helped Robert gently lift Shadow and place him in the back of the van on a makeshift mattress. Shadow allowed himself to be moved without resistance, trusting these men with the same blind loyalty he had always shown. Before closing the door, Henry hesitated. "Rob, I want you to consider something. Shadow disappeared during an operation that was never fully explained. He reappears now, 8 months later, in a condition that suggests someone kept him captive, neglected. And he shows up right on your route, on the street where you usually walk with your daughter. Don't you find that strange?" Robert frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe this isn't a coincidence. Maybe someone wanted you to find Shadow, or wanted to send you a message." Robert felt the chill return. The image of the man in the grey suit came back to his mind. That cynical smile, that deliberate question. How much for this police dog? Henry closed the van door and approached Robert, lowering his voice even more. "Be careful, my friend. If there's something bigger behind this, you could be stepping into dangerous territory." "And what? If Shadow was the one who stepped into that territory first, what if he discovered something he shouldn't have?" Henry sighed. "Then you already know the answer. He was silenced, the only way possible, by taking him out of the game." The two men looked at each other for a long moment. There was nothing more to say. Henry got into the van and drove off, taking Shadow toward the clinic. Robert stood on the pavement, watching the vehicle disappear into the late afternoon traffic. Claire pulled his hand. "Daddy, is Shadow going to be okay?" Robert knelt and hugged his daughter. "Yes, sweetheart, he's going to be okay. We're going to take care of him." "And that man? Why did he want to buy Shadow?" Robert hesitated. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that some people saw animals as objects? That the value assigned to Shadow on that sign wasn't a real price but a form of disposal? That there were people in the world who used and discarded living beings as if they were broken tools? Some people don't understand the value of things, Claire. They don't understand that some beings are special, that some can't be bought. "Is Shadow special?" "Very. He's a hero." Claire smiled, that pure smile only children can give. "Then we'll save him, Daddy, like he saved other people." Robert nodded, feeling a firm determination settle in his chest. "Yes, we'll save him." They resumed their walk to the ice cream parlor, but the mood was no longer the same. Robert couldn't get Shadow out of his head, nor the man in the suit, nor Henry's words. Everything seemed connected, but he couldn't see the full picture yet. That night, after dropping Claire off at Mary's house, Robert returned to his flat and turned on his computer. He accessed the police internal system and searched for the report on Shadow's disappearance. He read every line, every detail, every statement. And the more he read, the more he noticed the holes. Vague information, weak justifications, names that appeared and disappeared without clear explanation. Something was wrong, very wrong. And Robert knew that finding Shadow wasn't the end of this story. It was just the beginning. Chapter 2. Going viral. The video appeared on social media the next morning. Robert woke up to his phone vibrating insistently on the bedside table. It was 6:15 in the morning, still dark outside. He picked up the device with half-closed eyes, expecting some work emergency. But the screen showed messages from unknown numbers, notifications from social media he barely used, and missed calls from colleagues. The first message he read was from Mary. "Robert, what's going on? There's a video of you and Claire with thousands of shares. Call me when you wake up." He sat up in bed, wide awake now, and opened the video app. He didn't have to look far. The video was everywhere, on the homepage in the trending topics, shared by local and even national news pages. The title varied, but the content was always the same. Police officer finds abandoned dog and gives memorable response to businessman. Robert pressed play with a racing heart. The image was clear, filmed from an angle that showed the whole scene. Claire kneeling beside Shadow, Robert standing up, the man in the grey suit approaching. The audio perfectly captured the question, "How much for this police dog?" And then, with a clarity that made Robert swallow hard, his own voice responding, "Heroes aren't for sale, but the corrupt have a price." The video had over 200,000 views. The comments exceeded 15,000. Robert scrolled through, reading some of them. Most expressed outrage, support, anger. This officer is right. Some people think everything can be bought. How absurd to abandon a dog that served society. Who is this businessman? Does anyone know? We need more police officers like this, who defend those who can't defend themselves. But there were also different comments, more cautious ones. Be careful what you say, officer. There are powerful people who don't like to be crossed. That man in the video isn't just anyone. The officer had better watch his back. I know that businessman. He's not going to let this go. Robert felt a knot in his stomach. He hadn't even known he was being filmed. Who was recording? And why did they post it online? It could have been spontaneous. Someone just passing by who found the scene interesting, or it could have been planned. Another piece in a game he still didn't fully understand. The phone rang. It was Mary, and this time he answered. Robert, what was that? Her voice was tense, worried. You accused a man of being corrupt in the middle of the street, with Claire right beside you? I didn't accuse anyone specifically, I just responded to a provocation. A provocation? Robert, this video is everywhere. People are sharing, commenting, speculating, and Claire is in it. Did you think about that? He hadn't. Not at that moment. But now, hearing Mary's voice, he felt the guilt tighten. Claire had nothing to do with this. She was just being a child, showing compassion for a suffering animal. And now she was exposed on social media, along with him in the middle of a situation that was growing bigger by the minute. Mary, I'm sorry, I didn't know we were being filmed. I didn't think it would go viral. She sighed on the other end of the line. I know you didn't mean any harm, but you need to be careful, Robert. Claire is already asking about the video. She saw it at school, her classmates showed her. She's proud, she thinks you did something heroic. But I'm worried. What if this has consequences? I'll handle it. How? Robert didn't know how to answer. He hung up after promising to talk to Claire later and to be careful, but he had barely put the phone down when it rang again. This time it was his direct superior, Superintendent Ferguson. Nolan, I need you at the station. Now. The tone was dry, impersonal. Robert knew that tone. It was the tone of someone about to deliver a reprimand or bad news. He dressed quickly and headed to the Central Police Station in Manchester. The drive took 20 minutes, but felt like hours. Robert turned on the radio, but quickly turned it off when he realized even they were discussing the video. An animated presenter was saying, "And have you seen the video of the police officer who defended the abandoned dog? How wonderful, folks. We need more actions like this." When he arrived at the station, Robert noticed something was different. Colleagues looked at him strangely. Some nodded sympathetically, others averted their gaze. He went up to the second floor where Superintendent Ferguson's office was and knocked on the door. "Come in." Ferguson was a 58-year-old man, stout, with grey hair cut close to his scalp. He had a face marked by deep wrinkles and a perpetually tired expression. He was sitting behind a dark wooden desk, with a steaming cup of coffee next to a pile of papers. When Robert entered, Ferguson pointed to the chair in front of him. "Sit." Robert obeyed. There was another person in the room, a man he didn't know, wearing a navy blue suit, standing near the window with his arms crossed. He was about 40, athletically built with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. Ferguson took a sip of coffee and set the cup down with a heavy sigh. "Nolan, have you seen the video that's circulating?" "I have, sir." "And do you know who the man you called corrupt is?" Robert hesitated. "Not directly, but I know he's not an ordinary person." The man by the window stepped forward, and Ferguson gestured an introduction. "This is Investigator Paul Andrews from the Professional Standards Department. He'll be conducting an inquiry into the incident." Robert felt his blood run cold. Professional standards. That meant someone had filed a formal complaint. Someone with enough power to activate the internal mechanisms of the force. "Investigator Andrews, could you explain?" Paul Andrews had a deep, controlled voice. "Officer Nolan, yesterday around 5 in the afternoon, you were involved in an interaction with the businessman Augustus Blackwood, owner of several companies in the Manchester area. including Blackwood Imports and Logistics. During this interaction, you made implicit accusations of corruption. Mr. Blackwood has filed a formal complaint alleging public defamation. Robert felt anger bubble up. Defamation? He was trying to buy an abandoned dog as if it were merchandise. What Mr. Blackwood does or does not do is not relevant at the moment. What is relevant is that you, an officer of the law, made a public statement that can be interpreted as an unfounded accusation. This violates codes of conduct. I didn't make a specific accusation. I merely responded to a provocation. Ferguson intervened, rubbing his face with his hands. Nolan, I get it. I saw the video. I know the situation was tense, but you need to understand that this has become a public case. The media is all over it. Social media is buzzing. And Mr. Blackwood has very good lawyers. If he wants to take this further, it could complicate your career. Robert took a deep breath, trying to control his frustration. And the dog? Shadow. Is no one going to investigate how he ended up there, abandoned, after disappearing 8 months ago during an official operation? Ferguson and Paul Andrews exchanged a look. It was Ferguson who spoke, his voice carrying a warning tone. Regarding the dog, we are already aware. Dr. Henry informed us that you found Shadow. That also raises questions. The disappearance case was closed. Reopening it requires solid justification. Solid justification? He's alive, Superintendent. He was found in a deplorable state. Isn't that justification enough? It might be, but it could also be a coincidence. Dogs get lost. Sometimes they're found months later. It's not uncommon. With a sign saying, "Injured police dog?" On the route I usually take with my daughter, just as a businessman shows up to ask his price? Paul Andrews raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting there was a deliberate plan? I'm suggesting there are many unanswered questions. Ferguson got up from his chair and walked to the window, standing next to Andrews. Nolan, I'm going to be straight with you. There are powerful people involved in this. Augustus Blackwood isn't just a businessman. He has connections, political, economic. He contributes to campaigns, funds projects. Messing with him is like poking a hornet's nest. So that's it? We're going to let it all go because he's powerful? That's not it. But we need to be strategic, cautious. If you truly believe there's something wrong, you need proof, not hunches. Robert knew Ferguson was right, but he also knew that proof only appeared when someone had the courage to look for it, and if everyone cowered in the face of power, nothing would ever change. The meeting ended with a formal warning. Robert was instructed to stay away from Augustus Blackwood, not to make any further public statements, and to await the outcome of the professional standards inquiry. He left the office with a bitter taste in his mouth. In the hallway, he ran into Morris, a colleague from the investigation unit with whom he had worked on several occasions. Morris was older, close to retirement, and had a reputation for not keeping quiet. Saw the video, Rob. Good answer. Robert gave a humorless smile. Not what the superintendent thought. Ferguson's a good man, but he plays the game. Has to, if he wants to keep his position. Morris lowered his voice, looking around to make sure no one was listening. But there are things he can't say out loud, things about Blackwood. What kind of things? Morris hesitated, then gestured with his head for Robert to follow him. They went down to the car park, away from prying ears. Only when they were next to Morris's car did he speak again. Augustus Blackwood has been under investigation for years, but it never goes anywhere. Money laundering, bribery, fraudulent contracts. Evidence always goes missing. Witnesses change their minds. Documents disappear. He has people inside the force, people who protect his interests. Do you have proof of that? Morris shrugged. Proof? No. But there are signs, patterns, operations that get cancelled at the last minute, warrants that aren't served, and dogs that disappear. Shadow. Shadow? Morris looked intently at Robert. Do you know what operation Shadow was on when he disappeared? He was sweeping a warehouse in Trafford Park, something related to import irregularities. And do you know who owned the warehouse? Robert felt his stomach sink. Blackwood. Morris nodded slowly. Blackwood Imports and Logistics. The warehouse was being investigated because of an anonymous tip about strange activity. But when the team arrived, they found nothing. Nothing but boxes of legal goods, paperwork in order, and Shadow disappeared that day. Why did no one mention this before? Because the investigation was closed. Officially, there was nothing wrong, and Shadow was considered an isolated incident. But he found something. That's why he disappeared. Morris didn't answer directly, but his silence was answer enough. He opened his car door, but before getting in, he turned to Robert. "If you're going to dig into this, be careful. Blackwood is not a man who lets things go, and there are people inside the force who will do anything to protect him." After Morris left, Robert stood in the car park trying to piece together the puzzle. Shadow had disappeared during an operation at Blackwood's warehouse. Now 8 months later, he reappeared abandoned on Robert's route just as Blackwood himself showed up to ask the dog's price. It was a provocation, or a warning, or perhaps both. Robert decided to visit the veterinary clinic where Shadow was being treated. When he arrived, he found Dr. Henry in an examination room, reviewing results on a computer. Shadow was in a large cage, lying on a clean mattress with an IV drip. "How is he?" Henry turned, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes. "Better. Still weak, but responding well to treatment. The malnutrition is severe but reversible. What worries me are other things." "What things?" Henry pointed to the computer screen. "I did a blood analysis on Shadow. I found traces of sedatives. Not common veterinary drugs, Rob. These are substances used in extreme cases, for prolonged containment. Someone was keeping Shadow regularly sedated." Robert felt the anger grow again. "Why? So he wouldn't react, to keep him docile?" "Probably. And there's more. Shadow's identification chip was tampered with." "Tampered how?" Henry opened an X-ray image on the screen. "See this here?" He pointed to a small irregular spot in the neck area. "The chip was scraped. Someone tried to remove the serial number. They didn't manage to erase it completely, but they damaged it enough that the reading is compromised. If I didn't know it was Shadow, I wouldn't be able to identify him by the chip. That was done on purpose so he couldn't be traced." "Exactly." Robert looked at Shadow through the bars of the cage. The dog was sleeping, finally at peace, away from the pain and abandonment. But the marks of what he had suffered were there, invisible to the eye but deep. Robert silently vowed that he would find out the truth, no matter how many powerful people were involved. That evening, upon returning home, Robert received a call from Claire. She was excited, speaking quickly as she always did when she was worked up. Daddy, I did something. I want to show you." "What did you do, sweetheart?" "I made a video about Shadow, so people know he needs help. Mummy helped me. Can I send it to you?" Robert hesitated, but something in Claire's voice, that purity of intention, made him agree. "Of course, sweetheart, send it to me." Minutes later, the video arrived. Claire was sitting on the living room floor at Mary's house, holding a tablet showing pictures of Shadow. Her voice was clear, emotional. "Hi, everyone. My name is Claire, and I'm 6 years old. Yesterday, my daddy and I found a dog named Shadow. He was a hero. He helped the police, but someone hurt him and left him on the street. That's very wrong. If nobody takes care of the heroes, I will. Please help Shadow. He deserves it." The video was simple, sincere, touching, and Robert knew it would have an impact. Children have a power of mobilization that adults lack. Their words carry an honesty that cannot be ignored. Claire called again. "Did you like it, Daddy? Can I post it?" Robert thought about the consequences. He thought about Blackwood, about Ferguson, about everyone who had warned him to be cautious. But he also thought about Shadow, about everything he represented, and about Claire, his daughter, who was learning at 6 years old that fighting for what is right is worth it. "You can post it, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." Claire's video went live that same night, and just like the previous video, it went viral. But this time with even greater force. People shared, commented, created hashtags. Justice for Shadow became a national trending topic. TV stations began to cover the case. Journalists requested interviews. The public pressure was mounting, and Robert knew that this would change everything. For better or for worse, it was still too early to tell. But one thing was certain: Shadow's story would no longer be forgotten. Chapter 3. The Revelations. The following week was a whirlwind. Robert could barely leave his house without being recognized. People would stop to greet him, to take pictures, to express their support. Claire's video had touched the country in a way no one had anticipated. Animal protection groups organized demonstrations in front of the police station, demanding a full investigation into Shadow's case. Journalists camped outside the veterinary clinic, waiting for updates on the dog's health. Politicians began using the case to push their agendas, promising stricter laws against animal abandonment. But along with the support came the pressure. Robert was summoned twice by the Professional Standards Department to give a statement. Each question was asked with almost surgical precision, as if they were looking for a flaw, a contradiction that could discredit his version of events. Augustus Blackwood, for his part, remained publicly silent, but his lawyers worked behind the scenes, issuing formal statements denying any involvement and threatening to sue anyone who made unfounded accusations. Shadow remained at the clinic, recovering slowly. Henry had managed to stabilize his condition, and with each day the dog showed signs of improvement. His coat began to regain its shine, the wounds were healing, and his weight was gradually returning. But what impressed Henry the most was Shadow's emotional resilience. Despite everything he had suffered, the dog showed no aggression or excessive fear. It was as if, deep down, he still believed someone would come to save him. And someone had. One Friday afternoon, while Robert was sitting beside Shadow's cage, talking softly to the dog as he used to in the old days, his phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "I need to talk to you. It's about Shadow. Come alone to Heaton Park near the lake at 7 this evening. Don't bring anyone." Robert frowned. It seemed like something out of a movie, but the urgency of the message intrigued him. He replied, "Who are you?" The answer came minutes later. "Someone who knows the truth." Robert thought about ignoring it. It could be a trap, a provocation, or just someone trying to take advantage of the situation. But something in the message, perhaps the simplicity of the words, made him decide to go. He alerted his colleague Morris, asking him to be on standby in case he didn't hear from him within an hour. Heaton Park was one of Manchester's largest green spaces, with wooded areas, sports courts, and a boating lake that attracted families on weekends. At 7 in the evening, with the sun already setting, it was less crowded. A few people were walking their dogs, children played on the playgrounds, couples sat on benches enjoying the end of the day. Robert arrived at the lake and stood near the edge, looking around. For a few minutes, nothing happened. He began to think he had been fooled. But then a figure approached. It was a young man, probably in his early 30s, thin, with glasses, wearing jeans and a hoodie. He had a nervous expression, his eyes constantly darting around as if he expected to be followed. "Officer Nolan," Robert nodded. "You sent the message." The man confirmed with a quick gesture and looked around again before speaking. "My name is Philip Carter. I used to work for Blackwood Imports. I was fired 5 months ago." "Why?" Philip hesitated. "Because I saw things I shouldn't have." Robert took a step closer. "What kind of things?" Philip took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I worked in the administrative department of the warehouse in Trafford Park, the one the police investigated 8 months ago. I handled documentation, receiving goods, that sort of thing. The day the police operation happened, I was there. I saw everything." "Saw? What specifically?" "I saw when the police dog started sniffing something at the back of the warehouse. There was a restricted area where only authorized personnel could enter. Shadow started barking, scratching at a locked door. The officers with him got nervous. One of them, a sergeant, said the dog was too agitated, that it needed to be restrained. But I could tell it wasn't normal agitation. It was instinct. Shadow had detected something." "And what was it?" Philip looked around once more, the paranoia evident in his gestures. "I don't know exactly, but I know that minutes later, another group of people arrived. They weren't uniformed police officers. They were civilians, but with badges. They talked to the sergeant leading the operation, and then they took Shadow away. The sergeant told the other officers that the dog had slipped its lead, escaped through the back door, but it wasn't true. I saw it. They took Shadow on purpose, Who were these people? Philip took a crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to Robert. I took pictures. They're not very good because I took them in secret, but you can see their faces. And there's more. There are copies of documents I managed to get before I was fired. Records of strange financial transactions, fake invoices, payments made to offshore accounts. Blackwood was using the warehouse to launder money, and when Shadow found out, they had to get rid of him. Why didn't you give this to the police before? Because I'm scared. Philip lowered his voice even more. I have a family, a wife, 2 small children. When I was fired, I got a warning. They said if I said anything, my family would pay. But after I saw the video of you and your daughter, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. That dog suffered for months because of what he discovered, and nobody did anything. Robert opened the envelope and quickly looked at the contents. There were blurry but recognizable photos of men in plain clothes talking to the sergeant. There were documents with official stamps, financial spreadsheets, printed emails. It was enough material to reopen the investigation, maybe even enough to indict people. Why are you giving this to me now? Because you're the only one who seems to genuinely care. You risked your career to defend Shadow. Your daughter made that beautiful video. You're not afraid to stand up to powerful people. Philip hesitated, his voice breaking. I'm not brave like you, but I can at least give you the tools to fight. Robert tucked the envelope inside his jacket. You did the right thing, Philip. Philip gave a sad smile. I hope it makes a difference, but be careful, officer. Blackwood has a long reach, and the sergeant who led that operation wasn't just anyone. He was a direct subordinate of Chief Superintendent Vincent Montgomery. Robert knew the name. Chief Superintendent Montgomery had retired months ago, abruptly, right after an internal investigation into misconduct. The investigation never reached a public conclusion, but there were rumors of corruption, bribes, and involvement with unscrupulous businessmen. Is Montgomery involved in this? I don't know for sure, but I know that he and Blackwood were close. Very close. And the sergeant in that operation, the one who took Shadow, was one of Montgomery's trusted men. Robert thanked Philip and watched him leave quickly, disappearing among the park's trees like a shadow. He stood there for a few minutes, processing everything. The pieces were starting to fit together. Shadow hadn't gotten lost. He had been removed because he discovered something that could compromise important people. And now, 8 months later, he had reappeared exactly on Robert's route. Not by chance. Someone wanted him to be found. But why? To provoke Robert? To test him? Or to send a message? The next morning, Robert took the envelope to Morris. The two met in a discreet coffee shop in the city centre, away from prying eyes. Morris examined the contents carefully, his expression growing darker. This is dynamite, Rob. If it's true, we're talking about a money laundering scheme involving businessmen and corrupt police officers. And look at these names. He pointed to one of the emails. This one is from the Assistant Chief Constable, and this other one is from a Member of Parliament. Do you think they're authentic? Morris nodded slowly. They look it. But we need a forensic analysis, and we need someone trustworthy to take this forward. If we hand this to the wrong person, these documents will disappear before you can blink. Who do you suggest? There's a prosecutor, Beatrice Adler. She's known for not being intimidated. She's taken down politicians, businessmen, big shots, and she has no skeletons in her closet. If anyone can handle this, it's her. Morris made the contact, and 2 days later Robert was sitting in Crown Prosecutor Beatrice Adler's office. She was a woman in her early 40s, with black hair tied in an elegant bun and piercing eyes that seemed to read every unspoken word. She listened to Robert in silence, reviewed the documents, asked pointed questions, and at the end leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. Officer Nolan, what you've brought me here is serious. Very serious. If we can prove all this, several people will fall, but it also means that you and your family could become targets. I know. Even so, you want to move forward? Robert thought of Shadow. He thought of Claire. He thought of all the animals and people who had been used and discarded by people who thought they were above the law. Yes, I do. Beatrice smiled faintly. Then let's work together. I'll request an independent forensic analysis of these documents. If they confirm their authenticity, I'll open an official investigation. But until then, you need to stay safe, and so does your daughter. I've already spoken with her mother. Claire is going to stay out of the city for a few days with her grandparents. Excellent. Beatrice stood up, extending her hand. Welcome to the fight, officer. The days that followed were filled with growing tension. Robert was instructed to continue his normal duties, but he knew he was being watched. Unfamiliar cars appeared in front of his building. Anonymous phone calls came in the middle of the night. Veiled messages were left in his mailbox. But he didn't back down. Shadow, meanwhile, had improved so much that Henry began planning his discharge from the clinic. The dog could now walk without difficulty, was eating well, and his behavior was returning to normal. Robert visited him every day, and with each meeting the bond between man and animal grew stronger again. Shadow remembered everything: the commands, the games, the routine. It was as if the 8 months of suffering had been just a nightmare from which he had finally awoken. One afternoon, while Robert was at the clinic, Henry entered the room with a grave expression. "Rob, there's something you need to see." Henry turned on the computer and opened a security video. It was a recording from an external camera at the clinic from the previous night. The image showed the empty car park, lit only by lampposts. Then a black car appeared, parking in the shadows. A man got out wearing dark clothes and a cap and walked to the side entrance of the clinic. He tried the door, but it was locked. He stood there for a few minutes, looking around, then returned to the car and left. "Who is that?" "I don't know." But he came back twice that night. On the other cameras you can see he was scouting the exits, the access points. "Rob, someone is trying to get in here, and I think the target is Shadow." Robert felt his blood run cold. They wanted to finish what they started. If Shadow died now, with all the public attention, it would be seen as a tragedy, an animal that couldn't overcome the after effects of abandonment. But Robert knew the truth. Shadow was a witness. He couldn't speak, but his mere existence was a threat. "Henry, I need to get Shadow out of here." To where? Robert thought quickly. He had a friend, Peter, who lived in a country house on the outskirts of Manchester. A secluded, safe place, away from prying eyes. "I'm taking him somewhere safe, tonight," Henry agreed. He helped Robert prepare Shadow, placing him in a comfortable transport crate and providing medication and instructions for his ongoing care. When night fell, Robert put the crate in the back of his car and drove toward Peter's house. The journey was long, almost an hour's drive on B roads. Robert constantly checked his rearview mirror, alert for any sign that he was being followed. But the road was empty, only the sound of the engine and the occasional low bark from Shadow breaking the silence. When he arrived at the country house, Peter was already waiting. He was a big man with a grey beard and a warm smile. He and Robert had been friends since childhood, and Peter had always been the person Robert turned to in difficult times. "You brought the hero," Peter said, opening the transport crate and helping Shadow out. The dog looked around, cautious but curious, and Peter knelt, extending his hand. "Hello, champ. Welcome." Shadow sniffed Peter's hand and after a few seconds accepted the contact. Peter smiled. "He'll be fine here. I have a large, spacious kennel, and the property is fenced secure." "Thanks, Peter." "No need to thank me. You do the same for me." Robert spent the night at the house, making sure Shadow was comfortable. For the first time in days, he managed to sleep soundly. And when he woke up the next morning, he found Shadow sitting beside his makeshift bed, watching him with those loyal eyes that had never lost hope. Robert stroked the dog's head. "We're going to find out the truth, my friend. I promise." And Shadow, as if he understood, wagged his tail. Once, twice. It was enough. They were together again, and together they would face whatever came next. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. 2 weeks later, Crown Prosecutor Beatrice Adler called a press conference. The news spread quickly, and when Robert arrived at the Manchester Crown Court on that sunny November morning, there were dozens of cameras, journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers gathered in front of the building. Shadow's case had become a symbol. It was no longer just about an abandoned dog. It was about justice, about truth, about the right to question those who hold power. Robert was nervous. Beside him, Morris offered an encouraging smile. Claire couldn't be there, still with her grandparents for safety reasons, but she had sent a message that morning. "Daddy, be strong, Shadow is proud of you, so am I." Beatrice stepped up to the small podium set up in the court's lobby, wearing an impeccable black suit, her face serious but determined. She waited for silence to fall before she began to speak, her firm voice echoing off the marble walls. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Beatrice Adler, Crown Prosecutor for Greater Manchester. I am here today to announce the results of an investigation that began 2 weeks ago, but which has its roots in events that occurred 8 months ago." She paused, letting the tension build. "After a thorough analysis of documents, forensic reports, and witness statements, we have concluded that there were indeed serious irregularities involving members of the police force and the businessman Augustus Blackwood." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked incessantly. Beatrice continued. "The documents provided by a courageous witness reveal a money laundering scheme operating through Blackwood Imports and Logistics. Goods were imported with doctored invoices, funds were transferred to offshore accounts, and a portion of the illegal profits was distributed to individuals in strategic positions to ensure that investigations were sabotaged." She looked directly at the cameras, and when the police dog Shadow, during a routine operation, detected suspicious activity in one of the company's warehouses, he was deliberately removed to prevent his presence from leading to a deeper investigation. The room erupted in shouted questions, but Beatrice raised a hand for silence. "I have more to say. Based on the evidence collected, I am formally requesting a warrant for the arrest of Augustus Blackwood on charges of money laundering, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Furthermore, 3 members of the police force, including the former Chief Superintendent Vincent Montgomery, are being indicted for accepting bribes, malfeasance in public office, and abuse of authority." The impact was immediate. Journalists rushed to make live broadcasts. Social media exploded with the news. People who had followed the case from the beginning celebrated in the streets. Claire, watching on television at her grandparents' house, cried with joy. Mary called Robert, her voice choked with emotion, saying only, "You did it." But the fight wasn't over yet. Augustus Blackwood had resources, expensive lawyers, and immediately began to mount his defense. He denied all accusations, claiming the documents were forged, that he was the victim of a conspiracy, that he had never had any involvement in illicit activities. The media was divided. Some outlets supported the prosecutor's version, others questioned the validity of the evidence. Robert was called to give an official statement. For hours he answered questions, explained how he found Shadow, detailed his suspicions, and presented his version of events. It was exhausting, but necessary. And in the end, when he left the interview room, he found Philip waiting outside. "Officer, I wanted to thank you," Philip said, his voice hesitant. "I don't know if I did the right thing, but there's no turning back now." Robert placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did more than the right thing. You were brave, and bravery is something a lot of people lack." Philip smiled, a sad but relieved smile. "My wife is scared. We've moved. We're staying at my mother-in-law's. But I sleep better now, knowing I did something." Robert understood perfectly. Doing the right thing didn't always bring immediate comfort, but it brought peace of mind, and that in the long run was worth more than any temporary security gained through silence. The days that followed were a flurry of judicial activity. Arrest warrants were issued. Augustus Blackwood was detained while trying to board an international flight, his escape attempt only serving to reinforce his guilt in the eyes of the public. Former Chief Superintendent Montgomery, who was living a quiet retirement in a seaside town, was surprised by the National Crime Agency at his holiday home. The others involved were also arrested one by one, their defenses crumbling as more evidence came to light. Shadow, still at Peter's country house, was recovering completely. His weight had returned to normal, His coat shone under the sun, and the energy that had characterized him in the old days was beginning to return. Robert visited him whenever he could, and with each visit he felt the bond between them grow even stronger. Peter said that Shadow waited for him, that he would sit near the gate at the times Robert usually arrived, as if he knew. One afternoon, Robert took Claire to visit the house. It was the first time she had seen Shadow since that day on the pavement. When the dog saw her, his reaction was immediate. He ran to her, his tail wagging with a force Robert hadn't seen in months. Claire knelt and hugged Shadow, laughing as he licked her face. "Hi, Shadow. You look so handsome now, so strong." Robert watched the scene with a full heart. There it was, everything that mattered, a pure child, a loyal animal, and the certainty that fighting for what is right, even when it seems impossible, is always worth it. Peter had a BBQ that afternoon. They ate under the shade of a large oak tree, talking about simple things, laughing at old stories. Shadow stayed by Claire's side the whole time, as if he were her personal guardian, and Claire, in turn, shared every piece of bread with him, chattering non-stop about school, her friends, and the drawings she had made. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire asked, "Daddy, is Shadow going to work with you again?" Robert looked at the dog, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart. He's been through a lot. Maybe he just deserves to rest now." "But he's a hero. Heroes don't stop being heroes just because they get tired," Aubert smiled. "You're right. But sometimes being a hero also means knowing when it's time to pass the torch to others." 2 weeks later, Augustus Blackwood's trial began. It was a long process, full of twists and turns, but the evidence was solid. Witnesses came forward, documents were presented, forensic analysis confirmed everything. And in the end, after the jury's deliberation, Blackwood was sentenced to 15 years in prison for money laundering, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Former Chief Superintendent Montgomery received 12 years. The others involved received lesser but still significant sentences. The news was met with celebration. Spontaneous. Demonstrations took place in several cities. Shadow's case became a landmark, an example of how persistence and courage can bring down even the most powerful. Robert was at home when he received the call from Beatrice Adler. She was clearly emotional. "We did it, officer, we did it." "You're the one who did it, Miss Adler. I just brought what I had." "Don't underestimate your courage, Robert. You risked everything. Your career, your safety, your peace. Few would have done the same." After hanging up, Robert sat in silence for a long time. He thought about everything that had happened since that afternoon on King Street. He thought about how a chance encounter had changed everything. He thought about Shadow, Claire, Philip, and everyone who had refused to accept injustice as a natural state of affairs. That night, he returned to Peter's country house. He wanted to see Shadow. He wanted to be by his side, to share the silent victory that only the two of them fully understood. When he arrived, Shadow was lying on the porch, but he stood up as soon as he saw Robert. The two looked at each other for a long moment, man and dog, partners united by something that went beyond words. Robert knelt and hugged Shadow, feeling the soft fur against his face, hearing the strong heart beating in the animal's chest. "We did it, my friend. We did it." Shadow wagged his tail, and in that simple gesture, Robert found everything he needed. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the right thing. It was about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It was about loyalty, courage, and love. In the months that followed, life began to return to normal. Robert was formally commended by the Force, receiving a medal for his actions in the case. But what made him proudest was seeing Claire grow up with the certainty that fighting for justice was not only possible, but necessary. She started making videos again, no longer about Shadow, but about other cases of animals in need, using her voice to amplify the suffering of those who could not speak. Shadow, for his part, was officially retired from the K9 unit. Robert was given the option to formally adopt him, and he didn't hesitate. Shadow came home no longer as a work partner, but as a member of the family. Claire visited him whenever she spent the weekend with her father, and the two developed a special bond. Shadow was gentle with her, patient, always attentive. One Saturday morning, 6 months after everything had happened, Robert woke up to Claire shaking his shoulder. "Daddy, wake up. Today is a special day." "What special day, sweetheart?" "The day to take Shadow to the park. You promised." Robert smiled and got up. The three of them walked to Heaton Park, the same place where Robert had met Philip months before. But now the atmosphere was different. There was no tension, no fear, only peace. Claire ran ahead, Shadow by her side, the two of them playing under the morning sun. Robert watched, sitting on a bench, and felt a deep gratitude fill his chest. He had recovered more than a partner. He had recovered his faith that good still wins, that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. Suddenly, Claire came running back, breathless, with Shadow right behind her. "Daddy, Daddy, look what I found." She held out her hand, showing a small, shiny stone, probably a piece of quartz. "It's beautiful, isn't it? I'm going to keep it forever." Robert took the stone and examined it. "Yes, sweetheart, it's beautiful." "Do you know why?" "Because even when it was hidden in the ground, under the dirt, it kept shining. Just like Shadow. Just like you." Robert felt his eyes sting. "Just like you, Claire." The three of them stayed in the park until noon, enjoying the sunny day. Shadow ran, played, barked, lived, and for the first time since it all began, Robert felt that the nightmare was truly over. Shadow was home, justice had been served, and the truth had prevailed. When they returned to the flat, Robert made lunch while Claire drew in the living room. Shadow was lying at her feet, his eyes closed, resting. It was a simple, ordinary scene, but laden with meaning. This was the reward. Not the medals, not the praise, but these moments of peace, won through courage and sacrifice. That night, after putting Claire to bed, Robert sat on the sofa with Shadow beside him. He stroked the dog's head, thinking about everything they had been through together. The dangerous operations, the moments of tension, the disappearance, the reunion, the fight for the truth. "Thank you, Shadow, for everything." Shadow opened his eyes and looked at Robert. And in that gaze there was understanding. There was forgiveness. There was love. The loyalty of an animal who never gave up believing that his human would come to save him, and who now finally could rest knowing that love was reciprocated. The months turned into years. Claire grew up, continued her videos, and became a young activist known for her passion for animal rights. Robert continued his work with the police, but now with a renewed respect from colleagues and superiors. And Shadow lived out his final years surrounded by love, comfort, and dignity. When the time came, inevitable as it always is, Robert was by his side. Shadow closed his eyes for the last time, not on a cold, abandoned street, but in a soft bed, with his best friend's hand stroking his head, listening to words of love and gratitude. He passed in peace, knowing he had fulfilled his purpose, that he had been loved, that his life mattered. Claire, now a teenager, cried at the symbolic funeral they held in the garden of Peter's country house. They planted a golden chain, sapling in the spot where Shadow used to sleep in the sun, and every time Robert visited, he would sit under the shade of that tree and talk to his old friend, thanking him for everything they had lived through together. Years later, when Claire graduated from veterinary school and opened her own clinic specializing in rescued animals, she hung a photo on the reception wall. It was a picture of Shadow, in his glory days with the K9 unit, looking directly at the camera with those eyes full of determination and courage, and underneath, a plaque that read, "In memory of Shadow, who taught us that heroes have no price, but the truth is always worth fighting for." And every time someone asked about that photo, Claire would tell the story of a dog who didn't give up, of a father who fought for what was right, of a girl who learned that even the smallest voices can change the world. And with every story told, Shadow lived again. Not as a lost and abandoned dog, but as a symbol, a reminder that loyalty never dies, that courage always finds its way, and that love, true and pure, is the most powerful force there is. Robert, now older, with grey hair and deep wrinkles marking a face that carried life's stories, visited Claire's clinic whenever he could. And every time he saw that photo on the wall, he would smile. Because he knew that Shadow hadn't died. He had just changed form. He had transformed into inspiration, into hope, into living proof that it's worth the fight. And when people asked Robert what the most important moment of his career was, he never mentioned the large-scale operations, the complex arrests, the famous cases. He always said the same thing. It was when I found Shadow on that pavement, because that's when I learned that heroes aren't for sale, and that the truth, no matter how high the cost, is always worth paying.